Somewhere in the United Arab Emirates, during the worst of the Iran war, Israeli soldiers were quietly operating one of the most advanced missile defense systems on Earth. Nobody announced it. Nobody confirmed it. It just happened. And for weeks, while Iranian ballistic missiles and drone swarms bore down on Dubai and Abu Dhabi, a foreign military force, Israeli military personnel, stood between those cities and the fire coming from Tehran. That secret is now out, and what it reveals about the new shape of the Middle East is something nobody saw coming. Here is what we know right now. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee confirmed this at a conference at Tel Aviv University, that Israel recently sent the UAE Iron Dome batteries and personnel to help protect the Gulf country during the war with Iran. It was the first public confirmation by a government official of what Israeli officials are calling unprecedented assistance, deployed at a moment when the UAE was absorbing the highest number of Iranian strikes of any country in the entire conflict. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, made similar comments at a separate event at the Israeli mission, suggesting the release of this information was not accidental. Two senior American diplomats on the same day in different rooms saying the same thing. That is not a slip. That is a signal. And if you want to understand what that signal means and who it's directed at, stay with us. Because this story goes much deeper than a single air defense system. If this kind of direct, fact-based coverage is what you're looking for, subscribe now. This situation is developing fast, and the next move could come at any moment. To understand how Israeli soldiers ended up operating missile defense systems in the Gulf, you have to go back to February 28th of this year. On that date, Israel and the United States began a series of strikes against Iran. They said they aimed to induce regime change and target Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed in those strikes. What followed was not a contained military exchange. It was a regional explosion. The conflict left enormous damage. Thousands dead in Iran and Lebanon, dozens dead in Israel and the Gulf Arab states, and millions of people displaced across the region. Iran responded to the loss of its supreme leader by doing something that shook the entire global economy. It closed the Strait of Hormuz. Through that narrow waterway passes roughly 20% of the world's oil. When it shut, fuel prices in parts of Asia spiked within days. Supply chains that had taken decades to build fractured overnight. And then Iran targeted the Gulf. Since the beginning of the war, the UAE was targeted by Iran more than any other country in the region. According to the Emirati Ministry of Defense, Iran fired around 550 ballistic and cruise missiles and more than 2,200 drones at the UAE. Read that number again. 550 ballistic missiles, 2,200 drones, directed at a country of 10 million people, a country with no standing army capable of absorbing that volume of fire alone. Most of the missiles and drones were intercepted, but some managed to hit military and civilian targets. Hotels, airports, data centers, ports, and U.S. embassies across the region were struck as the war escalated. Abu Dhabi and Dubai, cities that function as global financial and logistics hubs, were under sustained aerial assault. The massive attacks the UAE suffered led the country to seek assistance from allies. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the Israel Defense Forces to send an Iron Dome battery with interceptors and several dozen IDF operators after a call with Emirati President Mohammed bin Zayed. That was the first time Israel had sent an Iron Dome battery to another country. The UAE was the first country outside the US and Israel in which the system was used. A senior Israeli official said the battery intercepted dozens of Iranian missiles. Think about what that means operationally. Israeli soldiers on Emirati soil shooting down Iranian missiles over Dubai. The deployment also appears to have required a deeper military presence than previously acknowledged. According to people familiar with the matter, the operation involved a not insignificant number of Israeli military personnel on the ground in Gulf states. And none of it was public. None of it was announced. It happened in the middle of a war, quietly, between two countries that only normalized diplomatic relations 6 years ago. One question that hasn't been answered yet: how much of this cooperation happened before the war even started? Iran has long claimed Israel maintained a secret military presence in the Emirates. For years, it was dismissed as propaganda. Now, a senior American diplomat just confirmed it from a stage in Tel Aviv. That is a very different conversation. The Abraham Accords were signed in 2020. At the time, most analysts described them as a diplomatic achievement, a normalization of relations, handshakes on the White House lawn, economic agreements, tourism deals. What we are learning now is that underneath the diplomatic framework, a military alliance was quietly being constructed. Israeli and Emirati officials told reporters that the two countries have been working closely together, both militarily and politically, since the war began, with the Israeli Air Force also carrying out a number of strikes targeting short-range missiles in southern Iran before they could be used to hit the UAE and other Gulf states. This was not emergency improvisation. This was coordinated warfare. The deployment underlined the growing relationship between Israel and the UAE, both long suspicious of Iran. It also represents the first publicly acknowledged deployment of Israel's military to the Emirates, home to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And that acknowledgement matters. It wasn't leaked. It wasn't forced out by a journalist. The US and Israel appear to have released this information intentionally, with the Emiratis and Israelis' blessing. The question is, why now? The UAE has faced Iranian missile and drone fire even after the ceasefire was reached last month. It has been trying to signal to nervous investors and the public that it remains open for business and safe. That framing is crucial. Dubai is not just a city. It is a global financial center, a regional logistics hub, a place where trillions of dollars in trade flow through annually. When it comes under missile fire, the entire architecture of Gulf commerce wobbles. By confirming that Israeli Iron Dome systems were defending Emirati skies, Abu Dhabi is sending a specific message to the international business community. We had serious protection. We are still standing. Come back. What do you think this means for the future of Middle Eastern alliances? Drop your view in the comments. We read every one. But there is a harder edge to all of this. Huckabee said the Israeli assistance was a result of the extraordinary relationship between the two countries formed by the Abraham Accords. He also said he was very optimistic that additional countries would soon join those accords. However, many Arab states remain incensed by Israel's wide-ranging military campaigns after Hamas's 2023 attack on the country. The Gaza Strip has been leveled, and Iran's allies have been attacked across the region. So here is the contradiction sitting at the center of this story. The UAE is positioning Israel as a protector. Other Arab governments are watching a war that has killed thousands, displaced millions, and collapsed regional oil infrastructure, and they are not applauding. Huckabee framed the situation bluntly. The Gulf states now understood they will have to make a choice. Is it more likely they will be attacked by Iran or Israel? That is the calculation being forced on every government in the region right now. Here is something that has barely been reported. Alongside Iron Dome, Israel also deployed Spectro, a surveillance platform used to identify Iranian drones at relatively short distances. And according to reporting in CTech, there are indications that Iron Beam, Israel's directed energy laser defense system, may also have been sent or considered for deployment. Iron Beam had only been delivered to the Israeli Air Force 4 months before the war. Its manufacturer, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, stated it had not yet entered operational use in the conflict with Iran at the time of delivery. The CEO noted that while the technology had been delivered, operational deployment required additional preparation and training. If that system was activated on Emirati soil, even partially, it would mean Israel deployed its most cutting-edge, not yet combat-proven weapons platform in a foreign country in the middle of an active war before it had ever been used at home. That detail is still unconfirmed, but the question of exactly what Israel brought to the UAE and what was used has not been fully answered. To understand what the people inside the UAE actually lived through, you have to strip away the diplomacy and the strategy and focus on what it means to be an ordinary resident of Dubai or Abu Dhabi during a regional war. The UAE is home to roughly 10 million people. The vast majority of them are foreign nationals, workers from South Asia, professionals from Europe and America, entrepreneurs from across the Arab world. Most of them did not come there for war. They came for stability, for opportunity, for the extraordinary infrastructure of a city-state that had positioned itself as the safest, most connected place in the Gulf. Then the missiles started coming. Missiles and drones struck hotels, airports, data centers, ports, and U.S. embassies across the region as the war escalated. Think about what an airport under missile fire means in practical terms. It doesn't just mean flights are canceled. It means the supply chains that feed a city stop. Medical equipment, food imports, fuel deliveries. The UAE imports the overwhelming majority of its food. When its ports and airports come under sustained fire, the logistics of daily life fracture rapidly. Major container shipping companies, including Maersk, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, suspended transits through the Strait of Hormuz and related routes. The Gulf was effectively sealed. Ships carrying fuel and goods sat waiting in the Arabian Sea. The UAE, which depends on the strait for its own energy exports, was simultaneously under aerial bombardment and watching its maritime trade collapse. For the foreign workers who make up the backbone of the UAE's economy, the construction crews, the delivery drivers, the hospitality staff, there was no evacuation plan. Many of them had no savings to leave on. They were in apartments in Dubai, watching interception trails light up the night sky, hoping the system above them held. One Emirati official was quoted saying the UAE was not going to forget the assistance provided by Israel during the fighting. That statement, from the official level, reflects something raw. the recognition that without outside help, the defensive picture looked very different. The UAE has been trying to signal to nervous investors and the public that it remains open for business and safe. That campaign is still ongoing. The confidence that had made the UAE a destination for global capital and international talent took direct hits, not just from the missiles themselves, but from the uncertainty of whether the country could defend itself without depending on foreign soldiers operating systems that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. There is also a quieter dimension to this story that rarely gets coverage: the psychological weight on the Israeli soldiers who were sent there. They were deployed to a country that, 6 years ago, did not officially recognize their existence as a state. They were operating in a foreign urban environment under conditions of secrecy during a war in which their own country was also taking fire. They were shooting down Iranian missiles over a skyline built on oil money and global trade, without being able to tell anyone what they were doing or why. Netanyahu's decision to share an Iron Dome battery with the Emiratis at a time when Israel was itself taking heavy fire could provoke backlash at home. And according to reporting, that tension exists. Israelis who lost relatives or had homes damaged during Iranian missile barrages will now learn that their country's air defense resources were also defending the UAE at the same moment. That is not a small political ask. The ceasefire is holding, but barely. Ongoing attacks throughout the region have threatened to reignite open warfare. The narrow Strait of Hormuz remains in Iran's chokehold. The US is maintaining a blockade against Iran, and negotiations between the two countries appear at a standstill. Iran didn't immediately respond to Huckabee's remarks confirming the Iron Dome deployment, though it has repeatedly suggested over the years that Israel maintained a military and intelligence presence in the Emirates. Iran's silence on that point is not necessarily calm. It may be calculation. Because the public confirmation of Israeli military forces operating on Emirati soil, intercepting Iranian missiles, hands Tehran a propaganda instrument it has been using for years as an unverified allegation. It is now confirmed fact. How Iran responds to that, politically, rhetorically, or militarily, is the next unknown. Step back from the Iron Dome battery. Step back from the missiles over Dubai. Step back even from the war itself for a moment. What this story actually represents is a before and after line in the Middle East's strategic architecture. Before February 28th, the Abraham Accords were a diplomatic agreement, trade deals, tourism flights, warm language about shared futures. Iran called them a provocation. Arab publics were skeptical. Most serious analysts noted the limits. The UAE and Israel shared interests, but not blood, not history, not the kind of alliance that gets tested under fire. They were just tested under fire. Israeli and Emirati officials say the military, security, and intelligence cooperation between the two countries has reached new heights during the war. The partnership is currently the closest it has ever been. An Emirati former National Security Council official, Tarek al-Otaiba, went further. He wrote that Israel was one of the countries that stepped up to provide real assistance to the UAE, describing the US and Israel as having proved to be true allies by offering support through extensive military aid, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic backing. That is an Emirati official, in writing, calling Israel a true ally. In a region where Arab-Israeli relations have been defined for decades by hostility, cold peace, and careful ambiguity, that sentence is a rupture. U.S. Ambassador Huckabee added that he was very optimistic that additional countries in the region will soon join the Abraham Accords. Whether that optimism is warranted depends entirely on how other Arab governments read this moment, not through the lens of diplomacy, but through the lens of survival. The war forced a binary: countries that could defend themselves and countries that couldn't, countries with air defense systems and countries without them. Countries that had made the strategic bet early, the UAE, Bahrain, and countries still watching from the sideline, calculating whether Iran's anger or Iran's missiles posed the greater long-term risk. Trump is traveling this week for a summit where Iran will likely be a main topic. Beijing has long been a buyer of sanctioned Iranian crude oil and has been hurt by the Hormuz closure, which has sparked a global energy crisis. China has its own calculations to make. It vetoed the UN resolution on Hormuz alongside Russia, but its port project on Kuwait's Bubiyan Island was just attacked by an Iranian paramilitary team. Beijing is watching its Belt and Road investments absorb Iranian fire. That is not a sustainable position. Iran didn't immediately respond to the confirmation of Israeli Iron Dome deployment in the UAE, but the silence is a clock, not a resolution. The ceasefire is fragile. The strait is not fully open. Iran has lost its supreme leader and absorbed staggering economic damage. But it has not been dismantled, and it has not agreed to terms. Negotiations are stalled. The U.S. naval blockade is still in place. Gulf states are still being hit. And now the world knows that when the missiles were flying, it was Israeli soldiers on Emirati soil who were doing part of the work of keeping the lights on in Dubai. What happens to that alliance when the war is formally over? What happens to it if the war resumes? What does Iran do with the confirmation that the country it has been warning about for years is now literally inside the Gulf? None of those questions have answers yet. What we know is this: the region that existed before February 28th is not coming back. The alliances forged under fire rarely dissolve when the fire stops. And the Iron Dome battery that intercepted Iranian missiles over the UAE did something no diplomatic agreement could do on its own. It created a shared memory of danger and mutual defense that will shape this relationship for years. Whether that is the beginning of something stable or the foundation of a longer and more dangerous confrontation is the question every government in the region is asking right now. This story is not done. The ceasefire is holding by threads, negotiations are stalled, and the confirmation of Israeli forces operating inside the Gulf just changed the diplomatic map in ways we are only beginning to understand. What do you think happens next? Does this alliance hold and reshape the region? Or does Iran find a way to make it the target it always warned it would be? Drop your analysis in the comments. We read every one. And subscribe, because the next development in this story could arrive before the day is out.